a journey into the shadows of the Anunnaki. If one day you hear a whisper rising from deep within the earth, not the howling wind sweeping across barren fields, not the murmuring voices of people gathered by the riverbanks, but a low, chilling voice belonging to entities that have witnessed the birth and demise of mankind for thousands of centuries, what would you do? Would you flee, trembling as a primal fear crawls up your spine? Or would you stop, listen, and confront the horrifying truth that could unravel the fate of your very existence? Imagine a moment where everything around you dissolves. The brilliant sunlight consumed by an overwhelming darkness, the chirping birds and the gentle lapping of waves along the distant Tigris River suddenly falling silent, leaving behind an endless, abyssal void where time ceases to flow, and every memory of life is devoured by nothingness. This is not the familiar darkness of a moonless night, but something far colder, more absolute, a bottomless chasm that swallows lost souls whole. In this eerie stillness you feel it, an invisible pressure bearing down on your chest as though someone or something is watching you from beyond the veil of reality, from a realm where light has never reached. And then in that suffocating silence, you hear it, a whisper. Not from the wind that rustles the leaves, not from the voices of the living, but from the ancient ones. The ones who stood as silent sentinels when humanity first opened its eyes to the world. The ones who watched as the first mud brick temples rose from the dusty plains of Mesopotamia. The ones who have waited, quiet, patient, for the moment your final heartbeat fades, for the instant your last breath dissolves into the cold, eternal air. Who are they? These towering shadows, these beings once revered with both reverence and fear in the sacred hymns of the ancient Sumerians? Could they be the Anunnaki, the mighty gods once hailed as the divine architects of creation, the ones who molded mankind from the wet clay of the Euphrates, who granted us the fire of civilization, who taught us how to cultivate the land and construct our world from the chaos of the unknown? And yet, through some mysterious transformation, these same divine beings abandoned their celestial thrones and donned the robes of cold, unyielding judges, standing in the depths of Ker, the shadowy underworld of Mesopotamian lore, to preside over the souls of the departed. This is not a fleeting nightmare. It is not a myth whispered around campfires. It is an invitation to descend into the abyss of history, where secrets buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia lie in wait, where cuneiform tablets, etched with the knowledge of a long-forgotten age, speak of gods who did more than create life, they dictated death itself, where unanswered questions lurk in the darkness, challenging every belief you have ever held. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, if the Anunnaki were real, not just the figments of ancient imagination, not just names inscribed on the crumbling walls of ruined temples, but actual, powerful entities whose influence stretches far beyond our understanding, what would that mean? For you? For me? For the entirety of humankind in this 21st century? Did they truly create us from earth and blood, as the Sumerian myths suggest? Or did they also design a hidden system of judgment, a means to govern our destinies even after the flame of life flickers out? Why did some of the Anunnaki abandon the radiant sky, where they once reigned as deities of water, wind, and fertility, to descend into the underworld, a cold, lifeless domain where light never touches, where lost souls are imprisoned in the vast and endless void of oblivion? Meanwhile, others continued ruling over the heavens and the earth, accepting offerings from mankind, bestowing blessings upon the fertile fields. Why this strange divide? Could this be evidence of a far greater plan? A scheme beyond the comprehension of mortal minds? Could the evolution of their role, from divine creators to judges of the dead, explain why ancient civilizations, from the brilliant cities of Sumer to the towering ziggurats of Babylon, from the enigmatic pyramids of Egypt to the epic poems of Greece, gradually forged profound beliefs in the afterlife, a realm where every soul must face its final reckoning? These questions are not trivial puzzles that can be answered with a few lines on a clay tablet or a dusty volume of history. They are fractures in the very foundation of reality, cracks that reveal gaps science has yet to fill, mysteries that religion dares only whisper about. Every question pulls you deeper into the shadows, where truth is not always comfortable, where answers can make you shudder. but where, at the same time, you are drawn by an irresistible force, the magnetic pull of the unknown. Imagine, if the Anunnaki truly govern our fate, not only during our fleeting existence on this earth, but in the eternal realm beyond death, then would they have left behind traces in the stories passed down through millennia? In the strange dreams we dream at night? In the deepest fears we refuse to face when the lights go out and darkness creeps in? This journey is not just a voyage through the lost pages of ancient history. It is not merely a path through lands where gods once walked among men, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers nourished the first civilizations, where temples of mud brick rose toward the heavens. It is a search into the very core of the human experience, a crossroads where mythology, religion, and the unexplored mysteries of existence converge. The Anunnaki, the supreme gods of Sumer, loom like unshakable phantoms. Once, they were the guardians of life, powerful beings who led humanity through its infancy, who taught us how to sow crops, build cities, and carve our thoughts into clay. But as the centuries passed, through the rise and fall of empires from Akkad to Babylon to Assyria, something changed. Some among them took on an eerie new role, draping themselves in the solemn robes of judges, descending into the underworld to weigh the souls of the dead. Ancient texts such as the Descent of Inanna, the chilling tale of the goddess Inanna standing before the 7 Anunnaki judges in the realm of Kur, reveal a disturbing truth. The Anunnaki were not only the architects of life, they were also the arbiters of death, not just guardians of the material world, but rulers of the invisible realm where every soul must face its final verdict. This transformation was no accident. It was not a mere twist of mythological storytelling. It may have been the first seed, the earliest fragment of an idea implanted into the collective consciousness of humankind, an idea that would grow into the very concept of the underworld, the afterlife, and judgment beyond the grave. From the cold, shadowy plains of Kur, where spirits drift aimlessly in eternal forgetfulness, to the fiery torment of Gehinnom, from the abyssal pit of Tartarus to the hall of judgment in Egypt, the notion of a reckoning after death bears the unmistakable imprint of these ancient gods. But why did they choose this path? Why forsake the heavens for the darkness below? Was it a reflection of humanity's growing fear of death, or was it part of something far greater? This is not a dry history lesson filled with names and dates, nor is it a mere retelling of mythological tales for entertainment. It is an invitation to peer into the shadows of your own mind, where the most unsettling questions lie in wait, where you stand before an ancient gate, covered in dust and overgrown with vines, leading down a spiraling staircase into the abyss. Each step a descent into the past, to an era when the first humans gazed up at the night sky and wondered, where did we come from, and where will we go when it all ends? The Anunnaki may hold the answer, or at least part of it, but truth is never simple. It is always hidden between the cracks of history, in the silent spaces between cuneiform lines, in the whispers you only hear when the world around you grows silent. Brace yourself. What you are about to uncover is not just history or myth. It may be the key to understanding humanity's fate, not just in the distant past, but in our uncertain present and the dark, unknowable future. Turn back time and step into the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers nourished vast fields, where towering ziggurats stood as bridges between the heavens and the earth, and where among the first cities, humanity learned to write, build, and cultivate the land. It was here that the Anunnaki emerged, not as distant, untouchable deities, but as giant, formidable figures of divine authority, ever present in the daily lives of mortals. Unlike the gods of later myths, who reigned from celestial peaks like Mount Olympus, the Anunnaki walked among men, overseeing their fragile existence in a world where nature could be both a benevolent giver and a merciless destroyer. According to Sumerian mythology, the Anunnaki were the descendants of Anu, the supreme sky god, whose crown was adorned with the shimmering stars, and Ki, the vast earth goddess, whose embrace nurtured all life. Their very name, Anunnaki, translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came, a cryptic suggestion of their origins, hinting at their descent from a realm beyond human understanding, a celestial dominion that mankind could only gaze upon with awe and trepidation. As a divine council, they were a pantheon of cosmic rulers, each overseeing a fundamental aspect of existence. Enki governed the waters and the flow of knowledge, Enlil commanded the raging storms and the breath of life, Ninhursag nurtured fertility and creation, while Anu reigned over the infinite sky. Among them, Enki stood out, not only as a god of wisdom and creation, but also as a protector of mankind, his intellect as sharp as a blade slicing through the darkness of ignorance, his compassion as rare as fire in the coldest of nights. In the myth of Enki and the creation of humanity, it is told that he mixed the blood of a sacrificed god, in some versions, Kingu, a being slain in a celestial war, with the wet clay of the Euphrates, shaping the first humans. These creatures were fragile, but they bore within them both the frailty of earth and the divine spark of the god's blood. Yet, Enki's purpose was not to create mere servants to toil for the gods. He taught them how to farm, how to build shelter, how to survive the unpredictable wrath of nature, elevating them from fearful beings into the architects of civilization, the founders of cities like Uruk, Ur, and Nippur. At this stage, the Anunnaki were solely gods of life. They ruled from the ziggurats, where incense and sacrifices ascended to the heavens, and the voices of the faithful echoed in sacred halls. In return for offerings of fat lambs, golden grain, and fragrant beer, they blessed the land with fertile soil, bountiful harvests, and protection from disaster. Nowhere in these early myths did they reign over death, judgment, or the underworld. The afterlife, Kur, as the Sumerians called it, was a vague, shadowy concept, a distant, neutral realm where souls simply drifted after life's end. There was no punishment, no reckoning, no fear. But something changed. The radiant gods, once lords of the living, gradually descended into darkness, taking on a new and ominous role. Over centuries, as Mesopotamian civilization evolved, so too did its perception of death and the afterlife. The Anunnaki, once known as creators and protectors, began to appear in myths as judges of the dead, presiding over Kur, where the souls of mortals faced an unknowable fate. The transformation was slow, but it is reflected in later cuneiform texts, uncovered in the ruins of Nippur and Uruk. These writings suggest that the Anunnaki were no longer simply rulers of heaven and earth. They had become figures lurking in the depths of the underworld, watching not over the living, but over the dead. Enki, once the divine architect of life, was now also a god of hidden knowledge, keeper of secrets that stretched beyond the grave. Enlil, the storm god, was no longer just the bringer of rain and destruction. He became a force of divine judgment, determining fate. The lesser-known Anunnaki, who once stood on the periphery of myth, emerged in the underworld as silent arbiters of the afterlife, watching and waiting for the souls of the departed. This shift raises unsettling questions. Did this transformation reflect humanity's growing fear of death as something more than an ending? Did the Sumerians, as their cities grew and their knowledge expanded, begin to see mortality not as a simple transition, but as a terrifying reckoning? Or was this change intentional, an orchestrated plan set in motion by the Anunnaki themselves, ensuring that their dominion extended not just over life, but into eternity? The whispers of this transformation echoed in the rituals of Sumerian priests, in the hushed conversations of scholars deciphering ancient texts. The Anunnaki were no longer merely gods of abundance and prosperity. They had become something more. Something that watched, something that waited, something that stood in the shadows of the afterlife, ready to judge the souls of those who once worshipped them. This shift was gradual, spanning centuries, and reshaping the very foundation of Mesopotamian belief. But the outcome was clear. The Anunnaki, once beings of light, had stepped into the darkness of the underworld. And from there, they would forever shape humanity's understanding of life, death, and what comes after. Time is an ever-flowing river, and with each bend in its course, Mesopotamia bore witness to the rise and fall of empires. Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, each dynasty bringing forth kings with golden crowns, blood-soaked wars that shook the heavens, and myths that reflected the ever-deepening soul of humanity. This was no question the great unknown, life, death, and what lay beyond the veil of mortal sight. The Anunnaki, once benevolent guardians of creation, deities of life standing beneath the radiant sun, began to take on a new form, cold, silent judges of death, towering figures whose mere presence dictated the balance of fate. This transformation did not arise from nothingness. It was not the fleeting thought of a priest or the invention of a poet. It was etched into ancient clay tablets, whispered across centuries, from small villages along the river banks to the towering cities adorned with ziggurats. From the ruins of Nineveh and Babylon, where shattered remnants of history tell of gods who once shaped mankind, only to become its ultimate judges. Imagine the scene from the Descent of Inanna, one of the oldest recorded epics in human history, inscribed in clay around 2000 BCE. This was more than just a tale of pride and curiosity. It was a glimpse into the darkness of the underworld. Inanna, goddess of love and war, with golden hair like the sun and eyes that burned like fire, bore the unbreakable pride of a deity and the insatiable curiosity of a seeker of truth. She chose to descend into Ker, the Mesopotamian underworld, to confront her sister, Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, a cold, withered entity whose hands resembled skeletal branches, whose voice was a whisper carried by the winds of empty caverns. But this was no mere visit, not an act of sisterly reconciliation, but a reckoning, a challenge that even Inanna, in all her divine power, could not have foreseen. As she passed through the 7 gates of Ker, she was stripped of her divine might, much like the wind tearing leaves from a dying tree. One by one, she surrendered her jewels of power, her golden necklace, jade earrings, sacred armlets, and finally, even the silver-threaded garments that marked her as a deity. When she stood naked and vulnerable before the 7 Anunnaki judges, they did not speak. They did not accuse her. They did not offer mercy. They simply stood, silent as ghosts, their soulless gaze piercing through her, as though they could see every secret, every sin, every moment of her existence. From the moment she first opened her eyes beneath the Sumerian sky to the instant she stepped into the shadows of Ker. There was no plea for forgiveness, no opportunity to argue, no path to redemption. With a single, unfeeling glance, they sentenced Inanna to death. Her body, once a symbol of life and beauty, was hung on a rusted hook, a grim warning to both gods and mortals alike. A message that no one, no matter how powerful, could escape the judgment of the Anunnaki in the darkness of the underworld. This was not the Anunnaki of creation, the gods who had molded humanity from clay and gifted them the fire of civilization. This was the Anunnaki of judgment, the ones who held the scales of fate with ruthless impartiality, figures who had forsaken the light and embraced the abyss. Ker, the Mesopotamian underworld, was not a realm of fire and eternal torment like the Christian hell or the Islamic Gehinnom. It was not a place of punishment for the wicked, nor a reward for the virtuous. It was a gray, lifeless expanse, a vast and dust-filled silence where all souls, kings and peasants alike, drifted into oblivion, fading like dust on the wind. There were no flames of purification, no rivers of milk and honey, only an endless, suffocating stillness. A world untouched by the sun, where laughter and sorrow alike were swallowed by the weight of eternal silence. Yet within this silence, the Anunnaki ruled, not as mere inhabitants, nor as passive spirits like Ereshkigal or her blood-stained emissary Namtar, but as judges, as silent executioners of divine law. Some fragments of ancient texts discovered in the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh describe the Anunnaki alongside Ereshkigal and Namtar as a trinity of power in Ker, enforcing a mysterious, immutable order, a system of reckoning that mortals could only whisper about in fear and reverence. But why? Why would gods who once stood in the sunlight, who once accepted offerings from human hands, who once blessed the earth with fertility, choose to abandon it all, to descend into the depths, to take on the role of cold, merciless judges? Did humanity's growing understanding of death shape their gods into reflections of their own fear? As cities rose, as tombs became monuments, as the dread of the unknown loomed ever larger? Did the mortals of Mesopotamia, grasping for meaning in their mortality, push the Anunnaki into Ker, tasking them with facing the darkness on their behalf? Or was this the Anunnaki's own design? A plan set in motion from the beginning, a hidden mechanism to expand their dominion not just over the living, but over the dead? If so, was humanity ever truly free, or had they been woven into an eternal system of judgment from the moment they were created? Regardless of the answer, this shift marked a turning point, not only in Mesopotamian mythology, but in human perception of the universe itself. The Anunnaki were no longer just creators, they had become something else, something more terrifying. Their legacy did not end at the borders of Mesopotamia. It spread, carried by merchants, conquests, and whispers in the dark, embedding itself into the fabric of civilizations that followed. In Egypt, with its ritual of weighing the heart against the feather of Maat. In Greece, where Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus judged the dead. In the Hebrew Sheol, where all souls awaited an uncertain fate. Picture Akkadian Mesopotamia, the reign of Sargon the Great, when the cities of Sumer were first united into empire, and clay tablets began to inscribe more than just victories in war, but myths that shaped human understanding of the cosmos. Anunnaki became more than just figures of Sumerian legend. They became foundations upon which the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians built their spiritual worldview. By the time of Babylon, during the reign of Hammurabi, the law itself had been carved in stone, and so too had the role of the Anunnaki evolved from mere deities to cosmic enforcers. The myth of Inanna's descent, once a Sumerian legend, was rewritten by the Babylonians with a new, sharper focus, emphasizing the 7 Anunnaki judges not only as arbiters of her fate, but as symbols of a deeper truth. That death was no longer a mere vanishing, but a trial. This shift was not merely literary. It was woven into the fabric of Mesopotamian rituals, burial customs, and philosophies of existence. Temples once dedicated solely to the living gods now held rites for the dead. Funerary practices grew elaborate, with offerings left not just for the departed, but for the Anunnaki themselves, the silent figures waiting on the other side. So ask yourself, if the Anunnaki truly judged the souls of the dead, if they were more than just myth but real entities that once walked Mesopotamian soil, could it be that their legacy still lingers? Not just in the ancient ruins, not just in forgotten texts, but in our beliefs, our fears, and in the silent expectation that one day, all must stand before the final judgment. The darkness of Kher was never confined to the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, where mud brick temples once stood as bridges between mortals and gods. Nor was it limited to the ruins of ancient Mesopotamian cities where prayers once rose with the scent of burning incense. Instead, it spread like an unseen, chilling current, seeping through time and space, embedding itself into other civilizations with an irresistible force, shaping their perceptions of death, the afterlife, and divine judgment. It was as if Kher was never just an underworld beneath Mesopotamian soil, but a concept beyond borders, a seed planted in the human psyche by ancient gods, sprouting across distant lands, whispering the same terrifying truth in the ears of pharaohs, philosophers, and prophets alike. Across the scorching sands of Egypt, where colossal pyramids reached for the heavens like gateways to eternity, where the Nile River carried life through a barren desert, the echoes of Kher's judgment manifested in the Hall of Ma'at, where Osiris, the green-skinned god of the underworld, presided over the fate of the dead. Here, in the sacred trial of the soul, the deceased stood before a council of gods, much like the Anunnaki, as their hearts were weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart was too heavy with sin, it was cast into the jaws of Ammit, the devourer of souls, ensuring total annihilation. The parallels to the Anunnaki of Kher are undeniable. Both were unforgiving judges, both upheld a divine law beyond mortal appeal, and in both realms, fate was absolute. Further west, across the Mediterranean, in the shadowed depths of the Greek underworld, 3 legendary judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, fulfilled an eerily similar role. Like the 7 Anunnaki of Kher, these figures determined the fate of souls, sorting the dead between paradise and punishment. Elysium, a land of peace and eternal rest, awaited the righteous, while Tartarus, a chasm of suffering, was reserved for those who had sinned against the gods. To enter this realm, one had to pay a toll to Charon, the ferryman of the Styx, who carried souls across the blackened waters of the underworld, much like the river that separated the world of the living from the dead in Mesopotamian thought. The judges of Greece and the Anunnaki of Kher, though separated by geography and time, reflected the same cosmic role, cold, impartial, and inescapable arbiters of fate. Even in the Hebrew Bible, the concept of Sheol mirrors Kher with chilling accuracy. A gray, desolate place, neither a paradise nor a torment, where the dead merely exist in silence. Later, the emergence of Gehinnom, a realm of fiery judgment, evokes the idea of divine reckoning, much like the tribunal of the Anunnaki. Some scholars speculate that Yahweh, once a god among many in early Semitic traditions, may have risen to absolute dominance in a manner similar to Anu, while other deities were forgotten, erased, or absorbed into his singular divinity. If so, could it be that the divine laws of the Old Testament carry echoes of the Anunnaki's cosmic order, their shadow extending even into monotheistic belief systems? This interweaving of myths is not merely a coincidence, but a living testament to the transmission of ideas through war, trade, and migration. The Anunnaki were not just the gods of Sumer. They were the whispered figures in the darkest corners of human consciousness, shaping how civilizations understood life, death, and judgment. Imagine the ancient trade routes, where merchants carried not just goods, but stories. Their voices carrying the myths of Ker to Egypt, from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to the lands of Israel and beyond. Imagine Akkadian and Babylonian conquerors, bringing with them not just swords and spears, but the weight of their gods, embedding the idea of divine justice into the lands they subdued. Imagine a Greek poet sitting by the banks of the Styx, listening to a traveler from the east recount the descent of Inanna, with 7 judges standing in the darkness, waiting to weigh her soul. And from that tale, he weaves his own vision of the afterlife, shaping the myths of his own people. If all these beliefs are connected, if they are echoes of the same origin, what does it mean for us today? Are our perceptions of heaven and hell, of justice and reckoning in the afterlife, truly our own, or are they merely fragments of a forgotten past, shaped by gods who once ruled in the shadow of Ker? If the Anunnaki's judgment still lingers, buried in the foundations of our religions, our philosophies and our fears, then perhaps their influence has never truly faded. So when you stand before the pyramids of Egypt, when you envision the black waters of the Styx, when you read the scriptures of Sheol, ask yourself, did all of this begin in Ker? Did it all begin with 7 silent Anunnaki, watching from the darkness, their empty eyes fixed upon the souls of the dead, long before Osiris held his scales, before Minos passed judgment, before Yahweh's name was whispered in prayer? If their legacy shaped the civilizations of the past, then has it truly ended? Or does it still shape the way we view death, fate, and the ultimate judgment that awaits us all?